Dad, please don't misunderstand, my daughter-in-law said, still holding the empty bucket. I just wanted Mom to look young again. I stood frozen at the doorway to the waiting room. On the floor, my wife sat there trembling. Her hair and her white dress were drenched in a cold, lifeless color. Music from the ceremony hall drifted in, steady, unbroken, as if nothing had happened. I looked into Lily's calm eyes. Then I looked at Julie's broken, shallow breathing, and I understood. This was not an accident. This was a message, and it was sent straight to me. Before I tell you what happened after that door closed, if you're listening to this story late at night or during one of those rare quiet moments in your day, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, because what came next was not just one of my memories. It was the moment everything began to change. The music kept playing out in the garden. The notes flowed on, formal, even, as if the world were still moving exactly as it should. I stayed at the doorway a few seconds longer, just to make sure what I was seeing was not some mistake of old age. Julie was sitting on the floor. Her back rested against the old wooden wall. Her hands lay loose on her knees. The light silk dress she had chosen weeks ago was no longer recognizable. Dark paint covered her, from her hair down to her shoulders. Seeping slowly, heavy, I heard her breathing, short, broken, trying to find its way back to a familiar rhythm. Her eyes were wide open, staring into the empty space ahead of her, as if she had not yet understood what had just happened. Lily stood right beside her. The bucket at her feet was empty. She tilted her head and smiled softly, the kind of smile you see in family photos. "Dad, don't worry," she said, her voice low and gentle. "I just thought Mom needed a little change to match the happy mood." I did not answer right away. After years working with the law, I learned one thing. When everything becomes too quiet, that is when you need to listen the hardest. This room used to be an old storage space in the estate. The smell of aged wood and paper still hung in the air. No fresh flowers, no guests, no witnesses. Just the three of us, and a line that had just been crossed. Julie tried to turn her head toward me. Her lips moved, trying to form words. Since the stroke, every sentence took time. And patience. I stepped forward, about to kneel down. But Lily was faster. She grabbed a towel from the chair, rubbed Julie's cheek hard, as if wiping off a small stain. The motion was rushed, careless. Julie flinched slightly. I saw her hand begin to shake. "That's enough," I said. My voice was low, steady. "Stop." Lily turned to me. For a brief moment her eyes went cold, then soft again. "I'm just trying to help," she said. She was startled, that's all. Startled. I repeated the word in my mind. In my life, I have heard countless explanations. Some are meant to reveal the truth. Others exist only to cover something else. The way Lily positioned herself in front of Julie. The way she set the towel down like a task already finished. It told me which kind this was. I knelt in front of my wife. The paint in her hair had begun to dry, pulling each strand down with its weight. I did not touch her. I placed my hand on the floor instead, close to hers. "Julie," I said slowly. "I'm here." She looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but no tears fell. That silence felt colder than any cry for help. Outside, applause broke out. Someone had probably finished a speech. My son's wedding was going exactly as planned, and the contradiction struck me sharp and painful. While everyone was celebrating a beginning, something else had just been shut tight behind this door. "I'll call the staff," Lily said, as if handling a small mess in the kitchen. "We'll clean this up quickly. You don't want to disrupt the ceremony, right?" The question was gentle, but it hung in the room like a warning. "Don't make a scene. Don't ruin the happy day." I looked at Lily longer than necessary. Up close, I could see it clearly. The calm on her face, not the panic of someone who made a mistake, but the confidence of someone who believed she was in control. I stood up. My body moved on habit, not emotion. I pulled a chair over, placed it beside Julie so she could lean back. I told Lily I would take care of my wife myself. She shrugged, as if relieved to be free of an unwanted duty. In my mind, memories began to line up. The way Lily had pushed us to sign papers for convenience. The way she always chose moments when Julie was most exhausted to talk. I had ignored those details. Told myself I was being overly cautious. Standing in that room, I understood the cost of silence. I did not raise my voice. I did not call anyone in right then. I knew that any rushed reaction would only add another layer of chaos, and Julie could not bear any more. Instead, I took a slow, steady breath. Inside me, a decision formed. Clear, cold. What happened in this waiting room would not be covered up like that paint. It would not be called an accident, and it would not end in silence. I took Julie's hand, felt the faint tremor still running through her, and I told myself that from that moment on, everything had entered a different phase. One where the truth, even if it moved slowly, would be forced to step into the light. I led Julie out of the waiting room through a side door, avoiding the main hallway where guests were passing by. She leaned lightly on my arm, each step slow, careful. I did not ask her anything. There are moments when silence is the only way to keep someone from breaking apart. Asher appeared at the end of the hallway. His face was tight with stress. An earpiece from the event team still hooked over one ear. My son saw his mother's condition. Then he looked at Lily. She moved quickly in front of him. Her voice trembled. Her eyes filled with tears. "Mom just slipped," she said. "I was helping her when Dad came in. Everything got messy." Before I could speak, Asher turned to me. "Dad," he said, fast in a low voice. "Today isn't the time. I'll take care of Mom. Don't make people panic." I looked at my son. What I saw in his eyes was not indifference. It was fear. Fear of responsibility. Fear of choosing a side. I nodded. "Just once, very slightly. I'll take your mom to sit down and rest," I said. "You go back." Asher let out a breath as if spared from a difficult question. Lily looked at me and smiled with gratitude. That smile stayed with me the rest of the way. We went into a smaller room, quieter. I helped Julie into an armchair, draped a towel loosely over her shoulders. I got her some water, waited for her breathing to steady. When she looked at me, her lips trembling slightly, I shook my head. "Not yet," I whispered. "Later." I stood up and went back to the room we had just left. The door was half closed. Inside, everything had been tidied up. The bucket was gone. The towel hung neatly in place. Only a strange smell lingered in the air. And stains on the carpet that had not yet been handled. I studied the room more carefully. Old habits from my profession had never left me. On the bookshelf against the wall, my old handheld video camera was still there. I remembered then. That morning the wedding coordinator had borrowed it to test the lighting, then placed it back temporarily. A small indicator light on the camera was still on. A tiny detail, but enough to make me stop. I picked up the camera, removed the memory card, slipped it into my inner pocket. I did not watch it right away. Experience had taught me that evidence must be treated more carefully than emotion. I locked the waiting room, returned its false, quiet, then went back to Julie. The ceremony was about to reach an important moment. I sat beside my wife, my hand resting on hers. Congratulations echoed from afar. I felt it clearly. Everything was stretched tight, so tight that one small force could shatter the balance. When Julie was steadier, I asked an old friend from the estate management to keep an eye on her. Then I went upstairs to my temporary office. I opened my laptop, inserted the memory card. I took a slow breath before opening the file. The image was not sharp, but it was enough. I saw the room. I saw Julie standing near the chair, her hand gripping her purse. Lily appeared behind her. No one else was there. At first, the sound mixed with noise from outside. Then Lily's voice became clear, sharp, urgent. She said things I had never heard her say in front of the family. I saw Julie's shoulders being held tightly. I saw her try to shake her head, her mouth moving. Then came the moment when the dark color poured down. Fast, decisive. I stopped the video before it ended, not because I had seen enough, but because I needed to keep my mind clear. What I had just seen was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a sequence of deliberate actions. I sat still for a few minutes, let my breathing return to normal. Then I copied the file to a separate hard drive, set a password. I did not think about confronting anyone right away. I thought about Julie. I thought about Asher. And I thought about this. If I stayed silent, it would happen again, in another form, more discreet. I went back downstairs. Lily was standing near the entrance to the ceremony hall, adjusting her dress, accepting compliments. When she saw me, she walked over. "Is Mom okay, Dad?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "She needs rest," I said. "I'll stay close." Lily nodded as if she had expected that. That's the right thing to do. We stood side by side for a few seconds. I noticed her eyes flick quickly toward the staircase leading to the private rooms upstairs. Very quick, but enough for me to understand. She was calculating the next move. I returned to Julie before the ceremony officially began. She held my hand tighter than before. I leaned down and spoke very softly. "I won't let this pass." Julie looked at me. Her eyes were no longer panicked. They were calm, as if she was used to waiting for me to decide. The signal bell rang. Guests settled into their seats. Asher stood at the end of the aisle, his face tense yet bright. I took my seat in the front row beside Julie. In my jacket pocket, the memory card felt heavier than it should have. As the music shifted, I understood something clearly. From this moment on, every action I took would have consequences. I was not looking for noise. I was looking for one moment, clear enough that the truth could not be turned away from. And I knew that moment was coming very soon. The ceremony began. I sat beside Julie, my back straight, my hands resting still on my knees. On the outside, I looked like a father listening to formal words of introduction. Inside, every small detail I had just seen was lining up, forming a clear, straight path. When things become clear, the next step is not reaction. It is verification. I did not leave my seat right away. I waited until everyone's attention was fixed on the couple at the front. When the music shifted, I leaned in and told Julie I needed to make a phone call. She nodded. Her hand squeezed mine briefly, then let go. That was her way of saying she trusted me. I stepped outside and found a quiet corner behind the stone hallway. I called an old friend. We had worked together many years ago. He had moved on to a different position, but he still picked up my calls whenever he could. I didn't explain much. I only said I needed to confirm a few things about Lily, as quickly as possible. "Give me the full name," he said. I read it out. There was a short silence. Then he asked again, more slowly, as if making sure he had heard correctly. "Where are you right now?" "At my son's wedding." He didn't comment. He only said he would call back. I returned to the ceremony hall. Everything continued according to plan. Lily stood beside Asher, her smile soft, her eyes forward. No one could see what was moving beneath the surface. I sat back down and placed my hand over Julie's. She tilted her head slightly as if asking a question. I shook my head. "Not yet." Less than 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. I stood again. This time I walked farther away, down near the side stairs leading to the back garden. My friend's voice on the other end was calm but firm. He said the story about a wealthy family in New York didn't match what he found in the records. Lily had changed her name once. There were old debts that had never been resolved. There were unclear financial ties, enough to explain why she needed a fast, discreet way forward. I thanked him and ended the call. I stood there a moment longer, looking at the trees behind the estate. The breeze was light, the sunlight steady. Everything outside was normal, absurdly normal, and I realized I no longer had doubts. I was facing a calculated sequence of actions, and it was not finished yet. When I went back inside, Lily was no longer in her place. Asher stood alone at the head of the aisle, speaking to the coordinator. I searched for Lily. I spotted her near the side staircase that led to the private rooms upstairs. When she saw me, she stopped, smiled, and said that Mom needed more rest. Her tone was gentle, reasonable, impossible to argue with. "Let me take Mom upstairs," Lily suggested. "It's quieter there." I looked at her. I thought about the phone call. I thought about the video. And I understood this was her next move, to separate Julie from the crowd, from watching eyes. "I'll go with you," I said. Lily blinked, very quickly. "Dad should stay here with Asher," she replied. "I'm used to taking care of her." Julie stood up slowly. She looked at me. Her eyes were no longer panicked. They were alert. I placed my hand over hers. "I'm right behind you," I said. No raised voice. No explanation. We moved toward the stairs. Lily walked first, Julie in the middle, me behind them. The staircase was narrow. Light from a side window cut across at an angle. At the turn, Lily stopped suddenly and turned as if to let us pass. In that moment, I saw her hand touch the railing, and Julie's body shift slightly. I reacted on instinct. I stepped up half a stair and reached forward. Julie stopped. There was no loud sound. No one cried out. Just a brief silence. Long enough for me to understand that if I had been one beat slower, everything would have been different. "I'm sorry," Lily said, immediately, her voice anxious. "I was careless." I didn't answer. I steadied Julie and said we were going back. Lily opened her mouth to say more, but I had already turned away. I didn't need any more explanations. I had seen enough. We went back down. I brought Julie to her previous seat where someone we trusted was watching her. I said I would not leave her again. Lily stood a few steps away. Her irritation was no longer hidden. She no longer had full control of the situation, and she knew it. I sat down and felt my heartbeat slow. In my mind, the options became clear. I had evidence, I had confirmation, and I had a boundary that had just been tested in public. What I needed now was not an argument. It was a moment large enough for everything to expose itself. I leaned down and whispered to Julie, "I won't let you out of my sight anymore." She nodded. Her hand rested on mine. Warmer, steadier. The music swelled. The core moment of the ceremony was approaching. I looked forward toward where Asher stood waiting. I thought about my son. A good man. One who had mistaken silence for peace. In my jacket pocket, the hard drive and the memory card lay still. They didn't feel heavy. But I knew that when the time was right, they would change the air in this entire room. I sat up straight. I took a slow breath. And I waited. The music slowed. Then it stopped completely. The officiant stepped forward, his voice low and steady, guiding the ceremony into the moment everyone had been waiting for. Asher stood straight, his hands clasped together. Lily stood beside him, her face calm, her lips gently curved. I looked at my son. Then I looked at the woman standing next to him. And I realized that silence, when it lasts too long, eventually creates its own breaking point. When the officiant asked the familiar question, if anyone had a lawful reason to object to this marriage, the room seemed to pause. It was only a formality, a question meant to be asked, then passed over. I knew that, but I also knew this. If I did not stand up now, I would carry this story with me for the rest of my life. I stood. The sound of my chair sliding softly against the stone floor was louder than I expected. A few heads turned. Julie looked at me. There was no surprise in her eyes. They were calm, still, as if she had known this moment was coming. "Excuse me," I said, my voice just loud enough to carry. "I need a few minutes." The officiant hesitated. Asher turned toward me, his face tight. "Dad," he said, unable to hide his confusion. "I'm not here to disrupt," I replied, still facing forward. "I'm here to clarify." I signaled to the technical team. The man in charge of lights and sound looked at me uncertain. I mentioned the prepared memory video. He nodded, probably thinking this was just another emotional surprise. The large screen behind the aisle lit up. For the first few seconds, the room stayed calm. Then a familiar image appeared. The old storage room, the angle slightly off, the lighting uneven, and then Julie appeared on the screen. A ripple of whispers spread through the seats. I heard someone say her name. When Lily entered the frame, I felt the air change. Her voice came through the speakers. Not loud, but clear enough for every word to land. Those words needed no commentary. They stood there, exposed, with no softness left to hide behind. I didn't watch the screen for long. I watched Lily. Her face drained of color for a split second. Then she gathered herself. She stepped forward, about to speak. But the footage continued. The rough movements, the pressure, and the moment when the dark color poured down. All of it unfolded in the heavy silence of more than 200 people. I raised my hand to signal stop when the video ended. The screen went dark. The room was not as loud as I had imagined. It was quiet in a way that forced everyone to face what they had just seen. "I don't want to turn today into a debate," I said, "but I cannot sit still and call that an accident." I turned to Lily. "You said you only wanted to help," I said, "but you knew exactly what kind of paint you brought into that room. You knew my wife's condition, and you knew why you needed her not to appear in front of everyone today." Asher stepped back. "Dad, what are you saying?" His voice trembled. "I'm saying some things are planned," I replied, "and some things cannot be hidden forever. I didn't draw conclusions for anyone. I only stated what I knew, in order, without adding or removing anything. I spoke about the camera being on. I spoke about the information I had confirmed. I spoke about why I believed this was not carelessness." Lily let out a thin laugh. "You're ruining your son's wedding," she said. "Just because you don't like me?" "I'm not standing here because of liking or disliking," I answered. "I'm standing here because I saw something that should not be ignored." There was a subtle movement at the back of the hall. Two well-dressed individuals stepped in and stopped at the edge of the space. I had called them earlier, when I needed to be sure this ceremony would not end with denial. The officiant stepped aside. Guests began to stand. The whispers grew clearer. Lily turned and noticed the people who had just arrived. In that moment, the calm on her face disappeared. Asher looked from me to Lily, then toward the back of the room. In his eyes, I saw something change. Not confusion anymore, but a slow breaking. He said nothing. He simply stood there, as if understanding for the first time that some silences cannot be saved by looking away. I turned back to Julie. She sat still, her back straight, her hands resting on her lap. She wasn't looking at the screen. She wasn't looking at Lily. She was looking at me. And in her eyes, I saw exhaustion, but I also saw relief. "I'm sorry I chose this moment," I said to the room. "But some truths, if not spoken at the right time, will never be spoken at all." No one answered. There was no need to. As those people stepped forward, Lily began speaking quickly. Too many words, trying to explain. I didn't listen. I had done my part. I sat down beside Julie and took her hand. Her grip was steady, warm. The music did not resume. The ceremony stopped there, and in that long stretch of silence I understood that everything had passed the point of return, not through noise, but because the light had finally been allowed to shine directly on what had always been kept hidden. After that moment, no one spoke of the ceremony again. Rows of seats slowly emptied. People left in silence, carrying confusion and questions they did not say out loud. I didn't stand up right away. I stayed seated beside Julie, holding her hand in mine, like an anchor in the middle of a room coming apart. Asher walked toward us. My son looked like someone who had traveled a very long distance in a very short time. He didn't look at Lily. He looked at his mother, then at me. "Dad." "Mom," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't know." "Now you do," I replied. No blame in my voice. "And what matters is what you choose to do with that knowledge." Lily had been asked to leave the hall. There was no loud scene, no shouting like people imagine. Just hurried footsteps, overlapping voices, then a door closing. When her presence disappeared, the air in the room felt lighter. Still heavy, but different. I stood and helped Julie up. We didn't stay long. I didn't want her to endure any more curious looks. We left the estate through a small back exit where the late afternoon sun rested softly on the stone steps. Julie walked slowly, but more steadily than before. I noticed her hand in mine no longer shook like it had that morning. The days that followed passed quietly. What needed to be handled was handled. In its own way, I didn't chase noise. I only made sure Julie was protected, and that the boundaries that had been broken were put back where they belonged. I took back control of the things I had handed over too easily, not to punish, but to prevent the same mistake from happening again. One evening, Asher came to see us. There were no long excuses. He sat across from us and lowered his head. "I stayed quiet when I shouldn't have," he said. "I thought keeping things calm was better." I nodded. "Many people think that," I said, "but silence isn't always peace. We didn't cut our son off. I never believed that was the answer. But I didn't allow everything to return to how it was, either. Asher needed time to understand, so I let him walk that path himself, with the responsibility of an adult. A few weeks later, Julie and I left Charleston. We chose somewhere farther away, quieter, a place where no one knew our story. The small house overlooking the ocean in Oregon wasn't special. Just wind, waves, and long afternoons without a schedule. But that simplicity made it easier for Julie to breathe. Every morning we walked along the shore. Julie moved slowly but steadily. Some days she barely spoke. Other days she paused a long time before finding words. I didn't rush her. I had learned that patience is a form of protection. One afternoon, as the sun neared the horizon, Julie squeezed my hand gently. "Love," she said, her voice hesitant, but clearer than before. Just one word. But I heard it as a complete sentence. I turned to her. I didn't speak. I simply nodded. So she knew I heard her. So she knew I was here. We stood there watching the light change on the water. No estate, no ceremony hall, no polished surfaces. Just two people who had walked together long enough to understand this. Peace doesn't come from avoiding things. It comes from facing them at the right moment. I thought about everything that had happened, not with bitterness, but with a late clarity. Some things we think we can cover up, like a layer of paint, but every covering eventually peels away. Only the truth remains, whether people are ready for it or not. If I learned anything from that day, it's this: protecting your family isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply standing up at the right time, saying what needs to be said, and quietly leading the person you love away from a place that is no longer safe. I held Julie's hand tighter as the sun finally disappeared. And in that moment, I knew everything we had given up was worth it. Not because we exposed a truth, but because, in the end, we chose peace. And we kept it. Thank you for listening to this story. If it made you think or touch something familiar in your own life, please tap, like, share it so others can listen too, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stories to come. Your support doesn't just help the channel grow. It helps stories like this continue to be told. Slowly, honestly, and with humanity.